yeah, you were what, a collegiate athlete. So I guess that's where it started, huh?
Yeah, so I was a collegiate athlete, and that's
Hmm.
when I kind of fell in love with the training process. And,
Yeah.
exercise, fitness, competition is something I like greatly enjoy and I'm passionate about in my life. And then,
Yeah.
typical female athlete syndrome. I tore my ACL in high school.
Oh God, that sucks. Okay. That's
And
shit.
then I was exposed to this athletic trainer at my high school
Hmm.
who, one, was the kindest person I've ever met. So I think that makes an impact up front. But basically, like, got me into, doing things outside of the field. And I was like, oh, like, this is amazing. I can attach to it. Never had a problem with my knee since. And that had a
Mm.
huge impact on me. Um, then it's funny because then I went to undergrad for nutrition and I had an experience after where I worked for a dietitian. And I was like, yeah, this isn't for me. This isn't like
It's a
the
tough one.
realm in which,
It's a
yeah, the
tough one.
realm in which I want. Yeah.
Yeah, because nutritionists, dietitians, taking taking that burden of having to like prepare something for somebody else, that's a hit or miss. Is that, do you agree? Because
Oh,
it's kind
yeah.
of, it's tough. It really is. I don't know if you can't. It's hard for anybody who goes into that realm of fitness to be able to orient certain diet plans and create stuff like that. It's tough, but I agree. So,
Yeah. And
yeah,
we'll get in definitely to how I started my company. But I think
yeah,
like a big point of that is I think in this day and age, you can make anything you want out of your career. So you
yeah.
can create a career that's very unique to you
Hmm.
based on the lifestyle that you want to live. And I think when I was exposed to, a dietitian career, it was
Hmm.
very clinical based. It was in a hospital. So I was dealing with a lot of sick people, and that
Mm.
really, to me, wasn't the ideal people who I wanted to work with at that point.
I don't hear that
Um,
too much. I don't hear too many stories about like clinical dietitians doing in the setting that you were in. That's a new one.
well, that was after my undergrad, and I
Okay.
was up in New Hampshire working in a hospital. So this was before I even had like an interest in, strength and conditioning, pretty
Sure.
much. Yeah, and then, I realized that like strength conditioning is something I'm very passionate about, and I
Hmm.
went into, a grad school program for that. And then it's funny because and then I was like, yeah, I actually don't really like this. And I
Checking off the
don't think this is
boxes.
what I want to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think it's all about, what you're exposed to and like the context in which you're in. And that program is very focused on like kind of training, a football program in many ways of,
Interesting.
just kind of pushing discipline on people as a rationale for why you should exercise in some ways.
Eh, and I mean, do you like that? Because what's your thought on that? Just with like real strict discipline. I mean, I know you have to, but in this day and age, adaptability is where it's at, right?
Yeah, but it's
You
also
know,
like, yeah, definitely in like long-term perspectives with
there
things.
you
So
go.
like,
Yeah.
you're dealing with kids who are, very pliable in terms of, their behavior and physically.
Yeah.
And it's like, how do you want them to view exercise long term?
Mm,
Because
mm,
if you're only concerned or telling them that the only thing that's important is how much weight you can lift,
that's true.
you
That's
can't
true.
sustain that for that long. And it's also going to have a like large amount of consequences. So like, and when we talked about the discipline aspect,
Hmm.
if you're kind of creating like a military-esque environment and kind of telling people that the only way to work hard is physically, I think you're sending like the wrong message. And that's not something that people are going to connect to and then connect with enjoyment through exercise later on in life.
So, would you say that when you approach training an athlete, is it kind of your mission to break through that very strict athletic identity that keeps them from seeing fitness long term? Because I know that's what that they, if they're athletes, then they live by that discipline. And seeing themselves outside of that athletic position is a tough one, especially when they go out of that lifestyle, when they have to transition out of the athletic lifestyle. It's a tough one,
Oh my gosh,
you know?
100%. I've heard
Yeah.
so many stories, even people I've played collegiate level athletics with, of,
Mm-hmm.
their sole identity was really wrapped around,
That,
athletics. So when
yeah,
that was taken away, that's like, okay, what do I want to do?
it's true.
Um, and who kind of am I as a person? So I think when I was training athletes,
Mm-hmm.
I tried to have as much fun in the weight room as
That's awesome.
possible.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's what's forgotten probably, right?
Absolutely. And I think a lot of, what I was exposed to in grad school
Mm-hmm.
and the foundation of strength and conditioning is really from the sports of powerlifting and Olympic weightlifting. And that's really not the same outcomes that we want from, multi-directional athletes who are
Mm-hmm.
playing, on the ice or on the field. They're not, looking to enter a powerlifting competition or
Yes.
Olympic weightlifting competition.
Yeah.
So I don't, especially in those types of trainings, like, yeah, of course we did some things that looked maybe similar to those
Mm-hmm.
things. Of course we all, squat different, excuse me, similar movement patterns,
Yeah.
but I really tried not to like hammer um loading as the kind of the sole value in off ice or off field training.
Well, and you bring up an incredible point because loading is everything to so many coaches, and especially for the purpose of building strength. I'm sure coaches just go down a progressive overload, and that's
Hmm.
all they do. Is hockey different in that perspective? Like, do you actually have to, have more of a focus on the aerobic side? I mean, I guess that's a no-brainer. I mean, you're skating on the ice all the time. Of course, you're doing some aerobic shit. You know.
Yeah, I think the lowest hanging fruit is like increasing capacity or
Okay.
workload as much as possible, right? So we
Okay.
have like this foundation of an aerobic system,
Mm-hmm.
and I think everything else will kind of like, what is that saying?
And
Raise
grow
all
from
tides.
there. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
it's
exactly.
yeah. Yeah. And true. Especially for hockey, you got to have the aerobic foundation. You know.
Definitely. And if you talk to a lot of like professional sports or like, hopefully good collegiate program
Mm-hmm.
coaches, one of your biggest roles is just to keep players available.
Yeah.
And, in hockey, there was a lot of low back, groin, hip issues. So if I keep loading these people through their hips and through like their backs,
Mm.
am I, helping them with their performance, or am I actually like doing the opposite? So, addressing that focus of, supporting their movements and taking those things away while also improving fitness. Don't forget about that for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Is probably going to benefit them a lot more.
I'm sure mobility has a very big importance in hockey, especially with like hip movement and everything. I mean, the whole sport is revolving around that. When you hit a puck and when you take shots. I mean, God, isn't it all just like hip mobility and hip stability?
Yeah, I mean, skating is pretty like kind of like
So,
unnatural in a lot of ways,
yeah, it
right?
is. It is. It's so hard.
And
My God.
what I actually saw is like it leads to a lot of, because it puts you in extreme ranges of motion through your hip,
Mm,
and it actually, you see a lot of pathology in terms of like stretching out of ligaments
okay.
and kind of the pelvis being positioned in a certain way that is going to cause a lot of lengthening to occur, where a lot of players actually probably have excessive mobility in some aspects.
That's an interesting thought. And yeah, you're right. I mean, it's an unnatural positioning for the pelvis in any movement with the skating and the shifting the weight side to side. I mean, you got to have some interesting mobility
Yeah, and
abilities.
unnatural. Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
And unnatural doesn't mean like bad. You know what I mean?
Tell a hockey player that, like, what the hell are you doing with your hip, man? That's not good. We gotta fix that shit. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, where did you start playing? Did you play hockey personally, or did you just get into the world of training hockey people?
Man, I was a strength conditioning coach at Northeastern University, and that
Okay.
program hockey's like the big sport there. So, right. So
Nice.
when you're dealing, I feel like there's like a general desire in the field of, movement professionals, physical therapists, strength and conditioning coach, whatever, to work with athletes.
Sure.
And I think sometimes we associate that with like a higher career status. So
Yeah.
like when you're in one of those programs, there's like this desire, either unconscious or consciously, where you want to work with like the number one teams, right?
Interesting.
So of course, naturally, I wanted to work with, the top five nationally ranked women's team there, or the top 10 at one year hockey team, men's hockey team
And you
there.
did.
I did, yeah, for
You
sure.
did. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it was fantastic, and I loved every second of it.
Is that is that something strength conditioning coaches need to realize, especially new ones getting into it, that they can do what you did and branch off and do their own thing? Because I think you're right. I think you want to just climb the ladder. That's the only thing that's on your mind if you're a strength conditioning coach. You want to work for the number one team. You want to work for the number one athlete. So
Oh,
it's
100%.
yeah,
And when you go through like a strength conditioning program, exercise science, a lot of that is they are telling you that these roles are basically what you should strive for.
yeah.
But I think one of the reasons I left, um, well, I wasn't looking to leave. I got like presented an opportunity,
Mm,
but I knew in the back of my mind that the assistant like director of sports performance and the director of sports performance were really never going to leave. And so it was basically like I was going to be stagnant probably for most of my career.
what a
And
realization. Yeah,
and
that's
it's like,
amazing.
okay. And I was working, 12, 14-hour days. Is this a
God,
lifestyle that I want to live,
God.
And with
Yeah.
a lot of those positions, if you move into an administrative role,
Uh-huh.
you actually coach less and there's more like paperwork and politics kind of to deal with.
Huh.
And is that, it's like I step back and I'm like, well, is that actually what I want to do? You know?
Wow. Wow. So
So,
so it's so you realized that it wasn't glamorous, and then I mean, isn't that the path to success though? You kind of realize you stagnate a little bit and you're worried that you're going to stagnate and you're like, is this all my life is cracked up to be at this point? And then you kind of yeah, I mean, it's and then you move on and then you realize, "No, I got all this cool experience. I'll do my own thing."
well, it's one of those things where it's like you have to have a short-term perspective, like,
Yeah.
day to day, do your thing, accomplish your goals, but you also have to have a long-term perspective of
Yeah.
like looking down the road of, am I working towards where I want to be in 5 years, 10 years? And for me, I loved working there. Don't get me wrong. I
Mhm.
absolutely loved every second of the people who I worked with
For sure.
and the athletes that I worked with. But when I looked at my lifestyle, is this a lifestyle that I want 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Is this the amount of money that I want to be making 5 years, 10 years from now?
Yeah.
And of course, not everything is about money, but like these are things that
Oh,
there's
you
things in
think
your
about
life
it.
you want to do. Yeah, of
Yeah.
course. Yeah. So I just, like I said, I wasn't looking, but then an
Mhm.
opportunity presented itself and, I decided to move on from that public setting.
Were you an active speaker like during the time that you were doing the strength conditioning, or did that come later?
Oh yeah, so when I was at that institution, it
Hmm.
was fantastic.
Mm.
And I gave at that time, I didn't think I was a very articulate person and I wanted practice speaking.
Hmm.
So I basically said yes to every opportunity that was presented to me.
Hmm.
And I sought out opportunities to present so I could, get better at it and
Yeah.
practice. And,
People need to do
and
this. People need to do
yeah,
that. Accept the opportunity.
exactly. And literally, it forces you to be like, okay, I need to actually organize my knowledge
Yeah.
so people understand what I'm trying to say. And that's a skill too.
And I always bring this up. It was kind of I've brought this up a few times. It's sort of funny. There's an analogy, or it's not an analogy. It's a thing that actually exists. Like comedians, they even famous ones when they first start their career, you have to actually like bomb or your jokes don't land in front of hundreds of people. And that's kind of what you willingly put yourself through with the public speaking, is that for comedians, they all just talk about bombing like it's no big deal, you know? Like how tough must that be to literally be on stage and just like nobody gets you? Like wow, what that must feel like. But you did that. You're like I need to just get through the tough parts, learn a little bit, and then now look at you. You're freaking known everywhere. Because
Yeah, I appreciate
I
that.
got tired of reading out how many like certifications you had. I had to take a break halfway through on your website or something. I know I got winded. I'm like, okay, so.
Yeah, I think there's an important point. Like when I hear you say that, I think
Mhm.
of one of the biggest lessons that I learned. And, I think you never go into a situation being okay with failing, like anticipating it. So
Yes,
it's
yeah,
not the prelude, it's the response. So like
that's
if,
a good way to
I
put it.
know if I know I have a presentation, right? I'm never going into it being like, it's okay if I fail, because that's going to remove the effort that I need to be able to prepare for that, right? But if
Wow.
I do go into that situation and something goes wrong, I don't do that great or I fail, it's the response that matters. Now it's like, okay, what did I learn from that? It's
Mm.
okay that I failed. Let's move on, kind of a thing.
Well, I like that you said you don't tell yourself it's okay that I fail. I've never heard
Yeah,
that before. I've never heard that before. I love what you mean by it though. Like you're focusing solely on your response to something that you perceive as a failure.
exactly. Because, failing is just a learning opportunity. That's all it is.
Yeah.
But like you can't set yourself up for that anticipation.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, and because if you set yourself up for that anticipation, you're not going to do it to begin with. You're not going to take the opportunity because you're already thinking
One
about the potential failure.
exactly, and
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
gonna just not put as much effort into it because you're
yeah.
just kind of like anticipating it, right?
Scared, yeah, and I'm
Exactly.
sure we all get into our head sometimes. I'm sure we all like we start to think of the possibilities and oh man, what could go wrong? Oh my god. But man, I'll take that with me though. That's a great piece of advice. That is something that people would not think about. So as far as
Yeah,
approaching failure. So so
absolutely.
so what do you do now? Are you you're currently kind of an active online trainer, huh? With your program?
Yeah, so
Okay.
when I started presenting when I was working in the collegiate setting,
Yeah.
um, there was like a project that I was working on where I identified kind of something that I wasn't seeing. So an exercise database for like, people to
Yes.
have instructions through basic exercises. So I started to create it and then I wanted to sell it. So
Mhm.
then I started like my own kind of company just so I could back that up a little bit. And it kind of sat like pretty silent. And then I moved into the private sector, worked for a company.
Mhm.
And then I was like, you know what? I really don't want to have a boss or work for anyone else. And I want to just like
Do
go it
your
on
own
my own,
thing.
be responsible. Yeah. So that's when I like, I went all into the company. And now, yeah, I work for myself, Michelle Boland Training, and
Yeah.
I do basically 60, 70% of my company is actually I still train people in person at a local, like I rent space from a local facility here
Wow.
and in the Boston area. And then, yeah, a lot of it is, educational content online, remote coaching online. Um,
Your
and I'm just diving into a lot of stuff.
your message is super different from every other coaching because the way I understood it when I looked at the website was you're trying to repackage raw fitness research so that the general consumer or the general weightlifter can understand it because it's tough to sit there and go and look at a PubMed source or something like that and do studies. So I like this message of repackaging research. It seems to be what you're doing.
Oh, yeah, thank you. I
Yeah.
appreciate that. And I
Yeah.
think, some of the best educators or professors I've had
Hmm.
have this crazy ability to take like complex information and then just
Yeah.
say it very simple. So I try to use like simple language when I talk.
Mm.
And that just, you get good at like talking on the level of understanding of your listener and not just talking over people,
Yeah.
because then they're not getting your message,
Not
right?
just using jargon and fancy words.
100%. And I think
Yeah.
that's a huge flaw in the fitness industry.
It is, especially for brand new trainers. It's kind of you take cues from, and you probably see this too. You being an experienced trainer, as a new one, you take cues from maybe the people on Instagram, or maybe the more highly marketed trainers out there who kind of have the cookie cutter plans, and they sort of just do things that sound good or look good. They don't necessarily base it off any kind of real fitness research. It's very much just based on their name.
Oh, 100%.
So
It's assumed authority,
it's
right?
assumed authority. Yes. Yes. Yeah. And
It I never had like Instagram when, I was a young trainer, right? At least I didn't use it that much. And
yeah.
you know,
Well, you're pretty big on there now.
I
So
try. We got to keep going here, but with that, hopefully. But
yeah.
yeah, like there's so many good stuff on it, and like as long as you know how to use it and what you're
True.
looking for, because there's a lot of it is missing context. So
Yeah.
a lot of stuff I talk about is taking a step back and being like, okay, like what is this, specific exercise useful for?
Yeah.
Where can you use it within your own context, not just do it to do it because it looks cool.
And I think people get very confused, especially when it comes to exercises, where to place them. Because
Yes.
you look at a squat, you look at a deadlift, you look at these more complex exercises, and people won't know the first thing about where to start with them, how to do the movement without really needing a trainer. So there's questions that need to be answered. So that's cool stuff. And the mobility too. I feel like mobility is always a missing ingredient. You can never have too much mobility research. People don't understand that one too much.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah. And is that kind of your key? You try to push in the mobility aspect with your training?
Yeah, I try to push basically challenging tradition.
Yeah.
So,
Challenging
going back
tradition. It's
to,
awesome.
going back to like the foundation I talked about before of like our fields, and a lot of it is, bodybuilding, Olympic weightlifting,
Uh-huh.
powerlifting. And it's like, okay, well, let's take a step back and say, okay, if I have a soccer player in front of me, or like a 50-year-old grandmother or
Yeah.
something, maybe that's a young grandmother, but
That's definitely, but very spry, very mobile. Yeah, it's
yeah,
healthiest grandmother
exactly.
ever. Yeah.
Absolutely. But it's like, what are the outcomes you're actually trying to accomplish?
True.
And then be able to break down like the skills they want to get better at, the abilities that
Hmm.
like physiological adaptations, and not just this general cliche, like, oh, just get them stronger or squat them or like put a
So
barbell in their
true.
hand.
Oh, good point. Good point. Because you're right. It's you have to have a more defined vision as to where you're going. And it's kind of cool. Do you implement a lot of compound movements when you train the older population? Are you big on just making them do the usual stuff like planks and, very compound movements, squats, deadlifts, that kind of thing?
It's so interesting because, I've had to change a lot about
Uh-huh.
how I coach
Uh-huh.
when I move from athletes to Gen Pop. So athletes, like, you almost have to pull them back in a way because they know their bodies so well,
Yeah,
and you could easily give them very complex movements and they can pick it up really quickly.
sure.
General population clients, there's kind of two. One, yeah, I tried to do compound movements and, you know, um, we still squat, we still do things, but not
Sure.
a lot of it has to do with like a barbell or isolation exercises.
Yes.
But the interesting part is a lot of my clients with no sport or training history have this like very fearful view towards movements, how they want to move, what they won't, like what they, psychologically or emotionally won't do
Yeah.
versus actually physically capabilities. And that's been really hard to kind of navigate and really figure out when I I entered into training this population.
You're right, and I think cueing becomes such an important aspect, especially when you're doing Gen Pop stuff. And I like the fact that you immediately said we might not be doing barbell squats, because I know that if they'd never done a squat, you got to change the implement. You got to do kettlebells, maybe you got to do things that put them in that position, right? Like a
Exactly.
goblet or something. You do something that immediately gets them. Okay, this will make you feel what muscles you're supposed to work if you did a barbell squat. So,
Yeah, and they feel like successful because, they're
mhm.
still squatting,
Yeah.
right? But they're doing it almost flawlessly with, holding a kettlebell in front of them, kind of a thing.
What advice would you give to a new trainer on how to transition clients into the more complex movements?
I would say don't rush it.
Okay.
And, the most cliche thing ever is like get good at like the foundations.
Get off this podcast. No, you're good.
I know
So
it's
no, that
so
makes sense.
terrible.
It's not though. No, it's something that always needs to be repeated. So it's still got the same value.
Yeah, and don't be afraid of doing the same things over and over again. I think
Oh,
people
that's good. That's
think,
really good.
yeah, I think their
Yeah.
clients just want novelty and to do something different, where it's like, like
Yeah.
you, they probably don't. It's probably you who are getting bored mostly.
That's a great piece of advice because I fell into that trap when I first started. And you're right. You get it in your head that the client is looking for the variety. They're looking for the muscle confusion every single time they meet with you. And
Hmm.
and it's not. It's about carefully working on the overload, the progressive overload, working on developing greater strength and greater mobility. So development rather than variety. So,
Oh, 100%.
yeah.
And I think I see, this is something I see overall, and then also things I've struggled with too is like, we have pretty good knowledge on like biomechanics,
Mhm.
anatomy, physiology, but the soft skills of actually being able to effectively communicate with people, um, to have them enjoy their sessions and like become friends with them as quickly as possible. Those are the things you see in the most successful trainers.
It's true. It's true. It's learning how to truly connect at a heart level with your client. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's definitely not saying like, okay, just, goof around the whole time, but it's like,
It's tough
you
sometimes.
know,
It's tough cuz if you get onto the friend uh level with them, then it's, your training. You probably see this too. Your training revolves around some other conversation while you're having them do the rounds, do the regular movements. You're talking about something else completely.
100%.
Yeah. Do you prefer one-on-one training over like a group training method, or you kind of just stick with the one-on-one training? You're not into the group stuff, huh?
Yeah,
Yeah,
right now I'm doing purely one-on-one, but
it's good.
there's nothing more unique and enjoyable than like having a team,
Mm-hmm.
like, in a team setting, like
It's true.
like especially when you've been around each other for a few years. First year you're like a stranger to them, right? And
Yeah.
they need to like trust you and have buy-in, but after that it's like, being in like the collegiate setting was absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I think too, I'm kind of stepping back with this question, but I think too with, the collegiate setting or collegiate type training, you can take some of the nutrition models and apply that to Gen Pop. I don't know how you conduct the way you talk to them about nutrition, but is that something that you can transition from an athlete's lifestyle to the general population?
Yeah, absolutely. I
I don't
think
know if I
it's
made that question clear. I kept talking and I'm like, I don't even know if I understood my own damn question. So I don't know. Make of that whatever the hell you want. It revolves around nutrition. So there you go. I just realized I was like, I don't know what the fuck I meant right there. So go ahead.
That's fantastic. I
There you
think
go.
I'll give you my answer and then you
Yeah.
can be like, yeah, that had
I'll
nothing
be
to
like,
do
that
with what I
wasn't my
just asked
question.
you.
Yeah. What the hell? It's okay. Go
So
ahead.
I think, right now I'm kind of in the mind frame where, my education or learning is really focused on other realms outside of fitness
Mm-hmm.
and strength conditioning. And why I say that is because I think um, you can take any sort of concepts from any realm and bleed them into like what you do. So
Yeah.
whether that's going from nutrition, working with athlete population versus general pop, it's like
Mm-hmm.
it's really the same. It's like, what are the underlying concepts of what I want to do? One, you want outcomes. Two, you have to create, like, your role is to create a clear path or plan towards that outcome
Mm,
based on the individual of where they currently are and where they want to be. That is an
exactly.
overarching concept that whatever realm that you're in, nutrition,
Mm-hmm.
fitness, physical therapy. So as long as you are clear about that,
Mm-hmm.
it's conceptual versus like contextual thinking. I think
Yeah.
people tend to change their mind based on who they're working with and whether they're talking about nutrition or fitness, but it's like you need to step back and be like, okay, what are the overarching concepts that are important right now? And it's usually the same. What doesn't matter like what realm you're in or who you're working with,
You
like the
can always
concepts
use
are
those
always kind of the same.
concepts. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, it's funny too. I think I've dealt with people, and maybe you've seen the same thing. You're right when you say you have to meet people where they are, because if you start a client, sometimes they've been dieting for a long time and you have to maybe start them down a more disciplined macro counting sort of journey, right? Whereas with some of the other clients, you maybe have to reverse diet them back to a higher calorie foundation and do something like that. Because I'm finding, with all these conversations I'm having, people love the idea of intuitive eating. They love the idea of reverse dieting. But then some people are like, no, you should at some point make them do a more disciplined calorie counting diet. So where do you stand on that? Like what do you think about those approaches to dieting or how you implement them?
I actually don't like deal with.
Yeah,
I'm
you
pretty
said the
clear.
nutrition. Yeah, you didn't do the nutrition
Well,
side.
Well, I'm pretty clear on setting expectations up front with the people who I work with, like what
Okay.
my services are. So a lot of times when people have, weight loss goals, I support those with the services that I do,
Okay.
but I have like nutritionists and physical therapy therapists that I work closely with, like for referral base. But
Ooh, that's
I
nice.
will say that like it's always going back to starting off with one thing. Like give them one goal
Okay.
and see if they can do that, you know, for 3 weeks. And if they can successfully do that,
Mm-hmm.
add a second one. And it's like
Ah.
sometimes I think people with dieting or losing weight, it's like it's all or nothing kind of a thing.
Oh,
And
it is.
it's
It's
not
so
going to
true.
work with many people.
It's
Yeah.
so true. People think they need to overhaul everything. They got to take all the
Yes.
stuff they've been doing previously and do something completely different. And it's like, well, not necessarily, you know?
Yeah, and that's not, we go back to like what's sustainable, right? Like
Yeah,
that's not
it's not
sustainable for
sustainable.
people.
You bring up a good point again. Um, the 3 week thing. I like that you're segmenting it into 3 weeks because I've talked to some people who do a week, I've talked to some people who do more like a month, but I kind of like the 3 week thing because isn't that based on habit changes? Like it's 3 weeks is kind of the the basis. Like if you could do something for 3 weeks, then it becomes a habit change. I think that's
Yeah,
what it's based on.
absolutely.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a
so
tough
I
one.
I call it I call it making checklists and
Mm-hmm.
checkpoints. So like checklists are all the things or variables like you're playing with that I do weekly checklists. So when I'm
Okay.
working with someone, I have like a few things written down that I say, okay, I have to include these things this
Sure.
week. And that's including like they're going to be exposed to speed at least once a week, or they're going to have at least a couple like rotational activities. And
Yeah.
then checkpoints are like things that I embed in what I'm doing to like test to see
Mm-hmm.
if I'm doing what I'm doing is working. So like, if that's like perform as many reps as possible set or, you
Checkpoints.
know,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah, so like it's like a testing thing. So same thing for like nutrition, right? Like if your checklist includes like things that you think are important for people to do. Like mindset, habit things, or in changes directly to what they're eating. Choose one, like check it off and have a checkpoint for it to make sure that like it's being accomplished and like positively reinforce and like acknowledge that accomplishment, because I think that's what a lot of people will miss, of like they'll just quickly move on to the next thing without like really taking the time to acknowledge like the success that happened.
So it really is. It's not even just the client taking those steps. It's the trainer acknowledging the progress through those small steps.
Oh,
So
100%, because
yeah,
that's like our whole role, right?
that's it.
Is
Yeah,
like
that's everything.
exactly our role is to create a clear path and plan,
True.
and we need to keep ourselves in check just as much as like the client.